Because Elad the Grey, aka Triptych, leaves such great comments. I was perusing some of the playlists that he had, and I came across the Atlantean Gardens, and I watched some of the videos, and my young, inexperienced mind to the occult was impressed by some of the information it found.
Had invaded and conquered the entire Mediterranean, were at the last moment defeated by their offspring colony, which we already identified with Zeus, and symbolically with the eagle. So the matriarchal Atlanteans, or serpent race, or snake people if you prefer, were defeated by the younger race or colony, which we can associate with the eagle, as the eagle was the symbol of Zeus, and the civilization that has dominated the Holocene, evident anywhere you see an eagle, whether it's the emblem of ancient Rome, or the emblem of Romania, Poland, Philippines, Montenegro, Austria, Albania, Russia, where in the center a dragon is being killed, Serbia, Indonesia, Iraqi Kurdistan, Kazakhstan, Sri Lanka, the United States, nationalist Germany, which I'll get back to in just a moment, or Mexico, which is very interesting, as in Mexico, not only do we have the eagle, but the eagle is almost always portrayed with a snake in its mouth, symbolizing who won the war of the gods. But the war is not over, as we'll soon find out.
I normally don't go into symbolism because I don't fully understand it. I found this to be pretty interesting, though, to see all these eagles versus serpents, because I've always been fascinated with the duality, the dual legacy, the opposing points of view, and how different they are. Not the Republican candidates or the Democrat candidates or politicians, but the people. There is two different, completely opposite sides, but not just with politics. There are people that totally despise Andrew Tate, Donald Trump, Dan Pena, and people like that. And you know, before he died, they all hated Tupac as well. They hate Ayn Rand.
Why would she make something like that up? Because hell have no fury like a woman scorned. You know what I'm saying? I'm guilty of a lot of things. I'm guilty probably of being a male chauvinist pig. I'm guilty of probably not caring as much as I should.
As far as the feminist movement is concerned, I am a male chauvinist, proudly.
And throughout my life, I've seen the male versus female gender war thing, and I never saw myself either as a male chauvinist or a feminist. I didn't care. I just wanted to have balance in the force. But once you become aware of this, then you see it in everything. And as we saw, you don't have to be a man to be a male chauvinist, in that Ayn Rand is not. I remember they were against Sarah Palin as well. And interestingly enough, with Ayn Rand, with Atlas Shrugged being the looters versus the producers, when I looked at this eagle logo here, I noticed it had something about egoists, and I clicked into it, and I found this article that is almost identical to the storyline of Atlas Shrugged, like the main message in it, the duality, the looters and the producers. In this article, they call it the altruists and the free men. And the entire Atlas Shrugged was a warning against altruism. And in this article, they call the altruists the slaves. And I'm all for the freedom. So maybe then that's also why Tate and Trump and Rand all appeal to me, is that I want the freedom, not the slavery. And it seems that the altruism is for the slavery. But let's read the article. The Eagle and the Serpent Prospectus. Our creed and aim, a race of altruists is necessarily a race of slaves. A race of free men is necessarily a race of egoists. Freedom cannot be granted. It must be taken. To convert the exploiters to altruism is a fatuous program, a maniac's dream. The only remedy for social injustice is this: the exploited must save themselves by enlightened self-interest. The exploiters are certainly egoistic enough. The only hope for the exploited is for them to become equally so. Yes, consistently, persistently egoistic. Egoism spells justice and freedom as surely as altruism spells charity and slavery. 3,000 years of sorrowful experience make the foregoing propositions too evident to us. The object of the eagle and the serpent is to make them equally evident to all mankind. We stand for the art of life and the life of art. We stand for that freedom which is the life of art and can alone teach us the art of living. When we have converted a body of believers to these views, then our mission will have begun. This last part here, oh exploited peoples Except ye are converted and become as proud as the eagle and as wise as the serpent, ye shall in no wise enter into the kingdom. Ye shall in no wise enter into the kingdom of justice. So it seems that the eagle and the serpent are both one. As I looked further into the site, I found this section on egoism, and this is right out of Atlas Shrugged, but it predates Atlas Shrugged. This is from like 1899. It's to present the most radical and consistent thought of the times in the simplest manner. Its purpose is the improvement of social existence from the standpoint of intelligent self-awareness, to gain recognition of the fact and popularize the idea that self-pleasure can be the only motive of any act, that any attempt to ignore it must necessarily be disastrous to human happiness as an attempt to ignore any part of the order of nature, thus developing a principle for a basis of action about which there can be no misunderstanding and which will place every person squarely on the merit of his or her probable interests, divested of the opportunity to deceive through pretension as under the dominance of altruistic idealism. From this basis, egoism will defend the individual against every phase of invasion, whether it be the exactions of political authority-protected privilege or the decrees of superstition-influenced custom. Wow, I mean, this battle is going on to this day over 100 years later. And that's why I'm bringing all this up. And that's why Ayn Rand brought it up in Atlas Shrugged, is to warn you about the altruism and warn you about these people that want privilege, because in Atlas Shrugged, it's called the aristocracy of pull. And that's the cronies that get together, the useless cronies that just use their crony power, the aristocracy of pull, to gain their power over the producers. And all these, abandon your ego, that's so they can enslave you. I always hate, that's the part I hated the most about spirituality, is the people that say, oh yeah, I abandoned my ego. And I'm like, man, that's the worst thing you could do. You know, and I say that I'm not either, but when I look at it, I really like Tupac, I really like Trump, I really like Ayn Rand. And I think it's because their spirits are the ones that that are trying to be suppressed by the media. And I hate suppression of any kind. I think if they were suppressing the feminist force, then I'd probably be for that. And perhaps that is suppressed with all the witches being burned in the past, so who knows? I don't want suppression of anything. I want all sides to have a voice. It also seems to be individualism versus collectivism, and that is the primary topic in Ayn Rand's anthem. I have no guilt saying that I am thoroughly for individualism, tremendously for individualism. I'm not for suppression of people, but the individual, me, myself, I must be allowed to exist and not have to be part of the collective and surrender to the collective. That's slavery to me. If you're into truthing and if you're into figuring stuff out and against the manipulation, there's two books you absolutely have to read. If you haven't read them yet, read them. Put them to the top of your list, your to-do list. First one is 1984 by George Orwell. If you're into conspiracy theory, if you're into truthing, if you're into thinking, and you haven't read 1984, you're missing the biggest piece of the puzzle. And specifically, the part in the book, The Theory and Practice of Oligarchical Collectivism. I push this so often, and yet I still know people that haven't read it. And you have to. I mean, it's required. It's required reading. Required. Not optional. Required. Is 1984 by George Orwell. Now, another book that completely weaponized me. When after I completed this, I was not the same person I was going into it. And that is Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. It's got a title that's boring, Atlas Shrugged. Like it's a bad title. And to let you know how powerful this book is, if you have a liberal Democrat friend, leftist friend, ask them about Atlas Shrugged, and they'll do everything to stop you from reading it. They will tell you a 5-paragraph essay. They will posture as like, you cannot read that book. That book is trash.
You know, this doesn't sound like you.
No, Bouban talks about space.
Where'd you get that book?
You sent it to me.
No, we would never give you this book.
You didn't send this.
Catherine Bouban is full of shit. What is she doing
Well, who
here?
sent it to me?
Oh, my God. She never leaves Paris. This is insane.
This is a pretty good book. You should read this.
And they'll have They'll have a whole authoritative dissertation to tell you about how bad that book is. And then once they get through their huffing and puffing and they'll be so in character, you cannot read that. And they'll tell you how bad it is. And then once they're done with all that, just say, okay, can you name a single character in the book? And they won't be able to. And then when they can't, and they should be able to get one, but see if they could get two. Because one of the characters, I don't want to give it away, just in case any of them are watching. One of them is so famous, it's a slogan for the book. I want them to have to do a little bit of work. But they can't name two. Now, the thing is, anybody that reads this book, they won't forget any of the characters. The characters, because the book is 1,000 pages long, and the storylines of these characters become part of your life. You'll never forget these people, and it almost be like, what would Jesus do? You would think about what these characters would do. Anybody who's completed that book, I don't think anybody walks out of it unchanged. Most people don't read it. And that's how you know, because most people aren't going to commit to 1,000 pages. Now, I don't expect you to read it with your eyes, but read it with your ears. Get the audiobook. The audiobook is 60 hours long. And I'm telling you, through those 60 hours, you will be completely transformed and weaponized. And it will be pretty hard for somebody to manipulate you if you listen to that book, take it in, and really, really put it into your spirit. It's going to make you invincible. I've only lost a single debate since I read that book. And the debate that I lost was from a supposition that I had prior to reading the book. And I'll even give you what it was. I was pushing free market capitalism. And a commie friend of mine said, hey, John, you know that free market capitalism is just as utopian, pie in the sky, not real as communism is? And I thought about it, and I said, touche. So I do like to, when I say I haven't lost, I don't mind losing, because when I lose, which is rare, I do get to learn something. And that was an important concept to learn, because free market capitalism is an imaginary heaven that doesn't really exist. Even, like, nowhere, not even on eBay. The key chapters or the key moments in Atlas Shrugged for me, it's different for everybody, but the trial of Hank Rearden is everything you ever wanted to say to the government.
How do you plead, sir?
I do not recognize this court's right to try me, nor do I recognize any of my actions as a crime.
Mr. Rearden, you will have to enter a plea before this court. Simply refusing to obey the law is not a defense.
If you believe you may seize my property simply because you need it, well, then so does any burglar. The only difference is a burglar doesn't ask my permission.
Sir, I will remind you the punishment this court might impose on you is severe.
Go ahead. Impose it. If you sentence me to jail, send armed men to get me. I will not volunteer to go. If you find me, you'll have to seize my assets. I will not volunteer to pay. If you feel you have the right to use force against me, then show it for what it is. Bring guns.
Sir, we have no intention of pointing guns and seizing your property.
Then why are we here?
Mr. Rearden, you are misrepresenting the letter and the intent of the Fair Share Law. It is based on the highest principle, the principle of the public good.
As defined by those who would dictate and regulate our behavior in our homes and our businesses, stealing their power from our liberty.
Gallery will come to order.
Mr. Rearden, you wouldn't want it misunderstood that you work for nothing but your own profit.
Indeed, I want it understood clearly. I do not recognize the good of others as a justification for my existence. If their fair share demands that I get nothing for my labors, that it requires me to be a victim, then I say, public good be damned, I'll have no part of it.
And how does that benefit your fellow man?
I do not owe you an answer, but I could tell you in 100 ways. Thousands of jobs, billions in revenue, fueling our economy despite your efforts to destroy the very foundation of our existence. And I believe most of my fellow men would say the same, if they had a voice.
The Concerto of Deliverance is everything you wanted to say to everybody who's ever used you. That's another section. It's justice. It's pure justice. And it's glorious. It's salivating. You almost put your fangs out. You're like, yeah, it's that satisfying. There is the 20th Century Motor Company. There is The Root of All Evil, The Money Speech by I'll give you his name, Francisco de Anconia. There is the Kenneth Danaher speech about the symbiotic relationship amongst all the characters. Oh, and there's a scene in the book where, I forget who, I think it might have been John Galt. One of the characters asks, how did we let these losers take over society? They produce nothing. They're total looters, and yet somehow they managed to take over society. How did we let this happen? John Galt removes all the producers from society and then goes back, and it's left with just the looters, and they kidnap John Galt, and they sit him down and they say, you got to fix this. And he said, all right, fine. You can fix all this just by lowering taxes. And they say, oh, get out of here. We need to have an adult conversation. We don't need that kind of craziness. He's like, no, seriously. Lower taxes and you'll fix all the problems. And like, no, we can't do that. And so they resort to torturing him with this like electrocution device. But he happens to be wearing like some kind of Faraday cage underwear that prevents him from getting electrocuted. And they wind up breaking the device. And John Galt fixes the device for them and kind of implies like, hey, idiots, you probably don't want to kill the only guy that knows how to fix your electrocution device. But I think you guys will be total morons, as I expect you to be, and you'll probably go right back to your little electrocute, right? And that's exactly what they did. They went right back to electrocuting. And that's something to keep in mind, is that these maniacs that want to control society, they'll go right back to electrocuting you. Obey is what they want you to do. And keep that in mind when you deal with them, and let them know exactly how much they don't control. Another thing you might want to ask your friend that protests you reading Atlas Shrugged is ask them, hey, is the reason that you don't like this book because you consider yourself a looter? And so, yes, the book divides everyone into producers and looters. And the sooner you start to do that, the sooner you'll stop allowing the looters to take from you, to take your greatness from you, to make you feel like you owe them something. You don't. And once you hear the John Galt speech, it's 3.5 hours long. It is the greatest lecture, and when I say lecture, I mean finger-wagging lecture of all time. It is so thorough, so ass-reaming, so total that about an hour and a half in, I threw in the towel. I'm like, yo, bro, I get it, man. I get it. And it goes on for another 2 hours. That's how ferocious and how much the author had to say about these looter people. She calls them cannibals. She calls them the culture of death. And that they want to just destroy everything for the sake of destroying. And they don't care. They're scorners. It's like they're the people in Proverbs, the first couple pages of Proverbs in the Bible by Solomon, where he explains that the scorners delight in their scorning and refuse wisdom. But when the time comes, these scorners will have no place in my kingdom when they need to. And that knowledge is thy life, and seek the knowledge. But the scorners. And so I thought to myself, sometimes, and this is kind of advice too, from Solomon to me, to you. Sometimes you think, man, if only I had, Donald Trump's money, or if only I had Mark Zuckerberg's money. No. King Solomon couldn't even stop the looter scorners. And he even tried offering all the wisdom to them. And they actively gave him the finger. Gave him that. Okay? None of us are King Solomon. And even King Solomon got the finger. And it wasn't the finger for anything he did other than trying to offer the wisdom. And the people refused the wisdom. Actively shunned the wisdom. Okay? There's two kinds. You could lead the horses to water and they won't drink. And I often say, not only have I led the horses to the water, and not only do they not drink it, they want me to drink it and magically quench their thirst. Those are just helpless people. But there's other people I know that actively scorn the wisdom. They actively, they even do that. Like I've actually had people they demand for me to believe their BS reality that they've been trained to see, and then I deconstruct, I destroy their entire argument, and eventually they just start going. They actually do that. They go, like it's like a short circuit goes off, and they I don't know if they're thinking of like squid finger. They make these weird, and it's not just one person. I've seen this happen at least 5 different times with 5 different people, where when they can't destroy you, they short circuit, and when they can't destroy you, and there's no one else around for them to grab to gang up on you, or if you even destroy all them, they still weirdos, bro. Am I supposed to have unity with those people? Those people don't operate on the same goal as me. The looters do not operate on the same goal as the producers. One of the things the looters don't like is other people that inherit money. Even though if they inherited money, they'd be like, oh yeah, they'd eat it up. But how dare somebody else get an inheritance and they don't? The way I frame this is, imagine me, someone who is a producer, someone who is good for goodness sake, someone who is excellent with his life, responsible, a good person. And this other guy that I know that does everything to destroy, everything to ruin society, everything wrong on purpose, intentionally causes problems. Now, over the course of both of our lives, it's most likely that I'm probably going to earn more than he does. Now, maybe he'll earn more than I do, but I doubt it, because he exhausts all resources as soon as he gets them. Not only his own resources, but he goes out to try to manipulate everybody into exhausting everybody else's resources in ways where it's like he simply wants to exhaust the resources. I don't even see him gain the enjoyment out of the resources that he's exhausting. He's just out to exhaust. It's like he is the Cloward Piven strategy personified 24 hours a day. One of the things I used to think of is, I'm like, wow, I live 24 hours a day. I'm awake for about 16 of them. And this guy is awake for 16 hours a day. And when we're talking about division, yeah, I'm not like, me and that person are not alike. Me and that person are not unity. There is no unity between me and that person. We have complete opposite approaches to the world. And at the end of my life, shouldn't I be able to pass down what I have to my offspring? Why shouldn't I be able to pass down what I have to my offspring? Why? And why do you have a claim on any of the stuff that I've earned? Because I've already paid taxes on it. So if I want to pass it down, what claim do you have? And is it that you actually want some of it, or you just want to make sure that somebody else doesn't have? And that's the issue I have with the left. I often say to them, I'm like, you know what? I think I figured you out. It's not that you want to be rich. You want to make sure that nobody else is rich. And there's a difference. See, I want to make everybody equally rich. They want to make everybody equally poor. Okay? Now they would say, no, we want to make everybody just above subsistence. Because they always reframe whatever you figure out about them, and then you call it for what it is. They like to modify it and make it sound better. Oh, we're not stealing people's property. we're expropriating it. Okay, so you got to watch their language and look up some of the words that they use, because they use words that sound nice and eloquent, and they usually mean things, or they're used in a context that's not obvious at first unless you really figure out what they're up to. They're up to stuff all the time. They're sneaky, they're manipulative and deceptive. And that's why I'm against them, because they don't openly disclose what they're up to. And they always shield their activities through something that sounds noble. They're cowards, they hide, they conceal. Now, I do have a flip side to all that, though, regarding inheritance. How long should a bloodline be allowed to rule people? 1,000 years, 2,000 years, 5,000 years? How long do the less than 1% get to rule over everybody? See, because that's the kind of stuff that creates the revolutions. Even though I know the wealthy, they have ways out all the time. They've always escaped it. But that's the kind of stuff there now. But then on the other side of that coin is, should the uninitiated be allowed to rule? Because what we're experiencing right now with equity, for the sake of equity, not meritocracy. I'm for a meritocracy. I'm not for equity. Meritocracy, yes. Equity, no. And even Bernie Sanders kind of agrees with me on that. So should the uninitiated be allowed to rule? And when I say the uninitiated, I mean, think of some of your irresponsible friends that go out drinking all the time, that don't save money, that don't have a budget, that don't act responsibly. Should they be given the reins to govern society just because? Just because? Just because? Here you go. Here's the reins to society. It's all yours, buddy. Just because. You didn't earn it, but hey, it's time for the little guy. Question: is the Bill of Rights compatible with communism? Freedom of speech? Right to privacy? Right to bear arms? Due process? Even ones like the Third Amendment of the quartering of soldiers. I think communism will quarter some soldiers on you. Right to a fair trial? No cruel and unusual punishment? No illegal search? So the answer is no to all 10 of the Bill of Rights. Are the antithesis of their agenda. I made the Show the Hand series, and pretty much conspiracy theory truthing is forcing the hand, showing the hand. So one of the things, we're always told that we're free. I seen someone just recently said, "You're free to do as I say." And I think part of showing the hand would be for some people to say, "Hey, U.S. government, we would like to find some land somewhere and be allowed to go there, free from your taxes, free from your laws, and we'd like it if you guys just left us to be there and allowed us to develop our own society and civilization away from you guys. Are we allowed to leave? Are we allowed to leave?" And even if it wasn't something as preposterous as that, are we allowed to leave? Are we allowed to leave? Are we? And even if we were allowed to leave, how can you cross through other countries? And it kind of makes you realize that we live on a farm, on a plantation. And what I mean by that is, think of a cow. You know that cow is going to the slaughterhouse. And let's just say the other cow says, "Hey, bro, they're going to chop our heads off and serve us on a plate." And the other cows say, "No, they're not." Conspiracy theorist. And it's like, no, they're really going to do that. I seen them. They're going to chop our heads off and serve us on a plate, and they're going to eat us. And then eventually one of the cows will say, just enjoy the grass and whatnot. And then one of the cows might say, "Well, what do you want to do about it? What are we going to do?" "Well, let's escape." So if the cows escape, where are the cows going to go? And so you, as a human being that up until this moment didn't believe that you lived on some kind of a plantation farm, if you do leave, where are you going to go? Where can you go? Like if we were slaves on a plantation and we escaped through the Underground Railroad somehow, there's another plantation that's going to catch us. And they're either going to put us in their slave population or return us back to the original slave master. So are we free to go? That's how you, once you find that out, that's how you show the hand. And once we show the hand, and all 350 million of us Americans start to say, are we allowed to leave? And if we are, where can we go? Where can we go? Are we actually on a plantation? I think we are. It really starts to seem that way. And ask if you know a guy that's serving, ask him if the civilians, what would they call what we live in? Ask them if they think of us as on a farm or a plantation or something of that nature. See what their answers are. Try it. If you just take a step back and look back at least the last 6 years, there's been a colossal hoaxes of narratives, of TINAG, of ARG, of all these things on the popular. I mean, it's so big. They wanted to see how far they can take you before you say something. And so far, no one said something. So take this as, it's like the Simpsons episode, The Hungry or the Damned, when Lisa comes out and says, wait, they're trying to eat us. And the Simpsons say, no, they're not. And Lisa says, yeah, no, I found their cookbook. Look. And it says how to cook humans. And then Homer gets offended that they'd be plumped up. And he says, nobody eats the Simpsons. And so that's what I'm trying to do, is wake you up here so now that you could look back and see how far they took you, to see how far they can go before people snap out of it, before people wake up and realize this psyop, and it's the psyop of all psyops.
About beer, it's not about burgers, and it's certainly not about country music. It's about beating you over the head repeatedly with the message. The purpose of progressive propaganda is not to persuade or convince, not to inform, but to humiliate. And so the less it corresponds to reality, the better. When people are forced to remain silent when they're being told the most obvious lies, or even worse, when they are forced to repeat the lies themselves, they lose their sense of probity. To assent to obvious lies is to become evil oneself. One's standing to resist anything is eroded. A society of emasculated liars is easy to control.
And we're going to start with CNN. And just think about the cast of CNN. And when I say cast, I say that intentionally, to think of them all as actors. Actor number 1, Brian Stelter. Who the heck on planet Earth likes Brian Stelter? Like, serious, like, besides for the comedic effect, but besides what Mark Dice did, who actually likes that guy? And yet he's got a position on the most major news network in the world. And not only did they hire the most impossible guy to give the job, to rub it in your face, to just stick their finger so far in your eye, they called his show Reliable Sources. His show is called Reliable Sources. How hardcore gaslighting, how hardcore is that, just mocking the audience? And I mean, so a couple of people pointed it out, like, hey, Brian Stelter's got a show called Reliable Sources. All right, so there's him. Now, number 2, and this is all CNN's cast. Think about Jeffrey Toobin, okay? During COVID, you know what happened. I don't even want to say what the guy did. If you don't know, just look it up. But during COVID, the guy gets busted on camera in a Zoom meeting doing that, and he gets a leave of absence, and then he's back on TV. Now, if you think about things that people have been canceled over, like some small things, some ridiculous things that people have lost their entire careers over, and then you think of Jeffrey Toobin being back on air, and not only that, the whole world knowing, like, how is that acceptable business behavior? I mean, serious. So that guy's back on TV, but think about every single person that you know that got canceled for nothing, for basically for saying reality is reality, saying 2 + 2 = 4 and getting in trouble because they're not adopting 2 + 2 = 5.
Beating you over the head repeatedly with the message. The purpose of progressive propaganda is not to persuade or convince, not to inform, but to humiliate. And so the less it corresponds to reality, the better. When people are forced to remain silent when they're being told the most obvious lies, or even worse, when they are forced to repeat the lies themselves, they lose their sense of probity. To assent to obvious lies is to become evil oneself. One's standing to resist anything is eroded. A society of emasculated liars is easy to control.
And that kind of takes us into that aspect of reality, of the cancel culture. So people that said things that everybody's thinking, that everybody could observe visibly, those people got canceled. And then the people that say the most preposterous, lunatic, maniac, completely removed from reality things, those people get amplified and promoted, and in some cases awards and big time positions. And I'll even jump to the end of the story. The Biden administration. Okay, take a look at the Minister of Health. I don't even know what the guy's, with the girl, the guy, I don't even know what the guy's title is. Okay, they'll say that he's not a guy, but he's a guy. Take a look at that guy. Now that guy is the top person for health. The guy doesn't look healthy at all, and that's the guy that's in charge of health. They're playing games with you. They've jumped the shark so far, and no one's called it out. They had to actually resign all these people. And yet people aren't saying, hey, bro, you're completely pushing lunacy. Like, not even Saturday Night Live, The Onion, the Babylon Bee, they can't even write the stuff that actually happens now. The reality has put spoof comedy out of business. Don Lemon. Anybody like that guy? Think about some of the things Don Lemon's been called out for doing, the Dirty Sanchez and all that, and getting smashed on New Year's, acting a fool. That guy was still that. Now he's eventually off, but that guy reigned with his reign of lunacy for years. Chris Cuomo, I mean, that guy had to go all the way to get removed from that channel. I think he at least was somewhat good at his job, although he looked completely roided out, or his eyes just always looked nutty. And that guy, remember when he said that you're not allowed to read the WikiLeaks?
Also interesting is, remember, it's illegal to possess these stolen documents. It's different for the media. So everything you learn about this, you're learning from us. And in full disclosure, let's take a look at what is in there and what it means.
Only we're allowed to tell you what the WikiLeaks say? Then Anderson Pooper Cooper. All right, he's all right. Wolf Blitzer, he's all right. Rachel Maddow, she's on MSNBC, lied to your face for 3 years about Russia collusion, and somehow she's still there. All of them lied to your face about C-19 for years with the masks and the lunacy. But think about how far the lunacy has gone. First, it started off as Discordianism, along with a little bit of culture jamming. And then it's almost like, let's just see if we could pull a video hoax, like a deep fake, and then you get away with that. And then it's like, all right, well, let's see how far we could put one over on the audience till they say stop. So then they forced everybody to say that Bruce Jenner wasn't a man, and they pushed it so hard that South Park even made like a whole season giving the finger to that, and from the forced requirement to not believe your eyes, you were forced to say that Bruce Jenner is not a man. Okay? And then what else did they do? They modified the entire reality by creating the phrase heteronormativeness, heteronormativism. Okay? It's to make it seem like the reality that you've lived through and that humanity has lived through for centuries is the wrong one. And it's not even like I care about what the people that are saying that, what they do, but it's gaslighting to the fullest extent, and that's offensive to me.
The purpose of progressive propaganda is not to persuade or convince, not to inform, but to humiliate. And so the less it corresponds to reality, the better.
What are they going to call it? So now you have minor attracted persons, MAPS. I mean, it's not like that just happened because there was NAMBLA and all that. But it obviously they need to normalize this because they're all guilty of it. So they got to normalize and modify reality and the morality of the reality so that when they all finally get brought down, because obviously, Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell had customers, yet there are none. Yeah, how could there be no list? How could there be no list? It's like everybody's waiting for somebody else to make the list. I don't even care, really. And so we see all of this data. It's like every single day the drips happen. They tell you all the dirty stuff that these people are up to, and then nothing ever happens. It's like they looked at 1984 by Orwell and said, "We got to try that. We got to try that. We got to make doublethink, 2 + 2 = 5, the Ministry of Truth. We got to do everything in 1984 in real life. Let's actually try it. Let's use it as a blueprint and see if anybody says anything." And everybody just accepts it. They just think that someone else is going to fix it. No one fixed it. No one's fixing it. Actually, the comedians are fixing it, finally. I heard a line where they said, yeah, they're reversing it to make the engineer is the loser and the janitor is the winner. And to the point that I even have to say, no, nothing against janitors. You know, it's a noble profession. But, you know, the engineer is the sucker and the janitor is the guy to be praised. That's how they've reversed the reality. Some would call that Satanism, is flipping everything on its head to change it from pole to pole to polar opposite just to do it. But then you also wonder, has this exercise been done throughout time? Because, you know, there's many that have observed the pendulum of the political parties, the right, the pendulum swings to the right, the pendulum swings to the left. You know, the best times are when it's in the middle, you know, when both extremes, it's to the center. But nowadays you can't even trust the center because the center is the uniparty. And it seems like they're the ones that have been engineering all this anyway. Top of all that, you know, when it comes to the system of white supremacy, the way it's framed, they make it seem like it was conservatives that set up the system of white supremacy. Okay, but in the same sentence, those same people would say, oh, those conservatives are so stupid. Okay, so if they're so stupid, how could they have possibly set up this intricate entire system of supremacy? No. You want to know who it was set up? It was set up by white liberals. So it should be called the system of white liberal supremacy because everything seems to go in their favor with their lunacy. And they're the ones that get to decide, okay, normal reality, no more lunatic reality. I also saw that the way some people were raising their kids, they were allowing their kids to be aggressive, knowing that everyone else is being conditioned to be passive. And so I guess they wanted to have the dominant kids, so they let their kids just bully and be totally aggressive and dominant. And I mean, I guess good for them. But what it also made me think of is most of the time, aggressive children behavior, especially when they want to push something that's so childishly crazy, like usually the adults are there to say, hey, that's fantasy. Or, hey, let the adults, you know, make those kind of decisions. And then, you know, the kids will throw their tantrums. The kids will say, nah. And I think someone looked at that and said, what if we never told the kids no for their maniac ideas that they demand be real? You know, what would happen if we listened to some of this lunacy and applied it amongst the adults? Because adults wouldn't let a kid do it. You'd reprimand the kid. But what if we take these same power ideas, because the kids are out for power, because that's what they just came into the world. They're learning how it works. They're learning how to exercise their control. So what if they were observed, the control tactics that kids use, and then the adults said, let's try these. And when I say the adults, I don't mean good conservative adults. I'm talking about lunatic left adults. But sharp, clever, the ones that would set up a system of supremacy. And they saw that and they said, if there's all adults in the room and the adults act like children, that would probably win because it would fool the adults to not reprimand another adult the way they would a child. And so we can use these childish powers to dominate and take over control of society by our maniac lunatic demands. Count W asked me to expound on division. So the first two things that come to my mind, one is what the media says Trump does, and two, Atlas Shrugged, dividing people between producers and looters. We'll quickly start with the media and Trump. Everything was fine when they had a singular control of the narrative. And because Trump offers an alternative, and when I say Trump, Trump really means us. He offers, or we, MAGA movement, offers an alternative perspective, the one that's shared by the majority of the population anyway. And so when the majority get to say what they think against what they've been conditioned to believe, that's called division. So anytime the media says, oh yeah, no, Trump causes division, or if you got some weenie friend that says, oh, I don't like Trump, he's so divisive, ask them to define, make them specify what is the division. And they're going to give you some lame thing and ask them to go deeper. Say, no. Explain division. When you say division, does it mean you get to throw all the punches and nobody gets to respond? When you say division, does it mean that you get to dictate reality and no one else gets to have a rebuttal against it? Yeah, because that's how they frame it. Make sure you undo all the framing and check them and have them check themselves before they wreck themselves. Because they like to frame it to keep you into their little narrative that they get to define reality, that reality goes through them. Let them know, guess what, MFers? It doesn't go through you anymore. It goes through us. Because we did a count. We took score because we figured out you guys have been lying about a whole lot. And so don't let that little division narrative that it's Trump that's the one that's divisive. No. What Trump did, he said, the emperor has no clothes. He opened up every Pandora's box and said, hey, you're fake news. No. You're fake news. You're fake news. No, we're not. Yes, you're fake news. And I'm repeating it to show the defiance. You're fake news. And that's just us against the media. But division, see, one of the things that some people say, they say, oh, well, all the politicians, they're all in the same gang. It's the uniparty. Yeah, of course it is. But you want to know something? There's a difference between people. Not all people are the same. And there's people that are complete opposites of each other. And I need that distinction to be loud and clear. So we could transition that to Atlas Shrugged. Atlas Shrugged divides people into two different camps. One camp are the producers. The other camp are the looters. Which camp do you think I support? But over the last couple years, and actually in the past, the producers were, at least in America, the ones that we praised, and those are the ones that got to dictate reality. But lately, it seems the looters are the ones that have been somehow pivoted, positioned, and got control of the narrative and have been re-engineering society to favor the looters. And when I say the looters, I'm not. You should read the book before you try to take my words out of context. Not my book. Read Atlas Shrugged. I never cared about the Elizabeth Holmes story. A lot of my friends that are on the left, they really talked about it a lot. It really bothered them. And sometimes it just pops up in my feed, or sometimes it appears in some video I'm watching. And when you look at the footage of Elizabeth Holmes, you almost wonder if Elizabeth Holmes is a provided villain. We have provided heroes, right? And so some provided heroes right now to dissuade people away from Trump is Ron DeSantis. It seems that Andrew Tate is a provided hero. Even though he's removed, he seemingly is everywhere. And there's some other provided, and I wish I didn't give you provided heroes on the right. I wish I had some off the top of my head of provided heroes on the left. But if you look at the footage of Elizabeth Holmes, it is filmed so suspiciously. It's almost like it focuses on the weirdness of her eyes, her facial characteristics. It's like they created her to create the example of the narcissist, psychopath, lying CEO. And just now that I put this thought out there, just go look up Elizabeth Holmes' story, or look up, and not only that, when you watch these videos, watch a couple of them, like the first 5 minutes of a couple, and they all have the same exact narratives and the same specific parts of the way they're framing the angle that it's like, wow, all these stories are all crafted the same exact way. And then you see the footage and you're like, this looks too perfect. And nobody knew. So I think something's going on there. Actually, some provided villains are Charles Manson, Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer. I mean, they probably really did these things, but it's almost like they're provided villains. It reminds me, ever since I saw the scene in Scarface, when Scarface says, "You need people like me, so you could point your finger and say, that's the bad guy." And yeah, so provided villains would be Pablo Escobar, and John McAfee is a provided hero or a provided villain. Edward Snowden is a limited hangout provided hero or provided villain. See, I think they even get more clever with it. So they don't want to just provide you a provided villain or a provided hero. It's even better written when half the country might see it as a hero and half would see it as a villain. So is Julian Assange a provided hero or a provided villain? Is Edward Snowden a provided hero or a provided villain? Is Andrew Tate a provided hero or a provided villain? Is Jordan Peterson a provided hero or a provided villain? So anyway, Elizabeth Holmes is a provided villain. And provided means that they manufactured it and they conditioned it and they layered it and they had, I mean, it seems, look at the footage, seriously, and it looks like it was all planned and scripted from the beginning. Now the truther, like the truther that's countering me, that'd say, "Yeah, John, everything on TV is scripted, bro." And yes, they'd be right. I just haven't seen anybody question like that Elizabeth Holmes story. That's that a provided hero? Was that scripted reality? And yes, it's all scripted reality. If it's on TV, it's scripted reality. Some of these people like Ghislaine Maxwell, has anybody gone to check on to make sure that she's actually in lockup somewhere? To like verify it, to make sure like, all right, is this person actually serving time? All right, well, this ran a little bit long. Thanks for watching. Drop me a comment if you made it this far. May the force be with you. See you next time.